Yeah.
All right.
Let's go.
Just gonna double check this. And I might have to just hit this. Doesn't seem to be working. Just hit. I can hit next on the keyboard for you.
We'll do that. All right. Well, everybody, introducing myself. Dejan Mladenovski. Used to work here. Used to lead SEO. Worked here 3 years. Yeah, been in SEO for this will be my 16th year. So 29 now. I've been in the game since about 14 years old. And I love SEO. Lately, I've been really looking into programmatic SEO. Super interesting, very scalable, and I feel it can really take your skill set to the next level. Let's go next slide. So, what is programmatic SEO, right? So it's pretty much the practice of combining multiple data points or data sets, cables, some people call it, to build unique pages at scale. When done correctly, you can dynamically create millions of pages, and it gives your website a whole lot more opportunity to rank for different sets of keywords that you otherwise wouldn't, just by targeting blog posts and doing sedimentary keyword research. Next slide. So, what are programmatic SEO websites, right? You've probably heard the term programmatic SEO, but maybe you're not familiar with sites that are actually implementing this strategy. So, you've got your TripAdvisor, it's got 15 million pages. You've got Booking.com, Expedia, Agoda, your travel aggregators. More local, you've got realestateanddomain.com.au, right? So, essentially they're compiling different products, different listings, and then they're creating landing pages at scale based on that category, that suburb, with that type of development, be it apartments, house and land packages, freestanding homes, etc. And this is just a scratch. I mean, others you may be more familiar with is like Yelp, which is the largest directory in the world. And where I work, Local Search, that's also a programmatic based site with 5 million plus pages. So yeah, next slide, James. So, we all know the common ones, but I think sometimes it's exciting to talk about, ones you may not have heard of, right? And pick this one out of the lot. I remember I did a pitch for this one. I thought it was a very, very interesting site. So it's called Wonderlog. It's basically a travel-based site, and it's pretty much gone from nothing to over 1 million visitors a month from the US in less than a year. And you might ask, how are people doing this? This is not, just AI content that's spun up, that's just trash. This is proper, well thought out, meticulated SEO, and it's been executed very, very successfully, right? You cannot get growth like this doing conventional SEO strategies. There was some link building, but there wasn't a massive link building campaign. This was purely based upon the fact that they found a kind of set of modifier keywords, created data set points around it, executed it, got it ranking, right? And now they're one of the market leaders. So next slide. How did they do it, right? So what they did essentially is they went city to city driving time and city to city driving distance. So they got those keyword modifiers, and they got data points based upon every single two kind of cities in America, and they essentially created dynamic pages at scale with that strategy. Pretty crazy the fact that even though they rank, you'll still have a Google map listing, but below that, which again, I think what you'll also find, this I think is interesting to throw in with most programmatic sites now, what's happening is Google themselves actually coming in and using their data point to outrank the existing aggregators. We've seen it with Google Flights, we've seen it with Google Hotels. Google are slowly doing it with the automotive space as well, with cars. I personally ran an opening hours website. And what happened was, we started getting big traction, we started ranking, and then what happened is a month later after we started getting traction, Google started putting the opening hours from their GMB data above us. So, you can't win them all, right? But that's life. But going back to Wonderlog, so they're doing this essentially for every city in the United States, and they're using a data set. And this is the type of data set you could grab off GitHub, off a CSV file, which then they compile it into a SQL database, which then they can display on the front end. What they also did well is they did customize programmatic internal linking. So linking related pages to other related pages, making sure every single page is interlinked from a different page, and making sure that no single page has been orphaned, that there is a link going to a page somewhere. The rule of thumb is that if you have 20 internal links on a given page, there's 20 links that are going somewhere. If it's all done correctly, every page at minimum should at least have 10 links pointing to it out of the million. So that's generally the rule of thumb, 50% of all internal links. Some are going to have more than others. The links you prioritize for internal linking are the ones that are actually getting the most traffic volume and actually performing the best. So those are the ones you would prioritize. Again, can be either by traffic or can be by revenue, depending on the strategy that you want to implement. Next one. So another thing that they did is the pages were built, in SSR, so that's server-side render. Pretty much it's flat HTML. When you load the site, if you turn JavaScript off, you'll see the flat pure HTML. You'll see all the links, you'll see all the data. There's no sort of client-side JavaScript or kind of like JavaScript hydration rendering going on. It's pure HTML, and this is preferred if you're building pages in scale of millions, because you want Google's crawl budget. Effectively going through the site, making sure every single page is crawled and is indexed correctly. On that note, you've got your two crawling budgets. You've got your HTML crawling budget, which can go in the millions even without much domain authority, right? But you do have something called your JavaScript rendering crawl budget, which is nowhere near as high. That can, you'd be lucky really to get 5,000 pages indexed by JavaScript, even with a large domain authority. So that's also something to keep in mind, and another reason why you should probably do SSR. So building category-based links that then feed off to the top pages based on search volume. Again, it's pretty self-explanatory. What we're doing is segmenting the site. We're making sure that the landing pages or the category pages have links pointing to your money pages or the most important pages. Very important. You can funnel links and spread the domain authority effectively to the pages you want them. And the crawl bots. So ensuring the crawl bots are crawling the majority of pages and optimizing the ones that are not. So you want to be. Has anybody here been doing some log file analysis or anything like that? No? All right. So
Westpac won't give us it.
Yeah, well, get him up, George here, give us the logs. So what you want to be looking at with the crawl logs is you want to basically, there's a few things you can look at specifically for programmatic sites. What you'd be looking at is you'd be looking at the pages that have been viewed by the crawl bot the most, right? Because then Google is prioritizing those pages. Those are the pages that you would then go and add your internal links to your highest value money pages from, because if the crawl bot's visiting those pages regularly, there's likely the most link equity to that page, which then can get redistributed throughout your site. That's, I guess, how you'd optimize the pages that, I guess, are not showing up. You can do other things as well with your crawl logs. You can identify, pages that are not getting seen, depending on how much levels you go down. Tools like Octopus, pretty good for that on crawl. I've been testing Botify lately. That is a really good tool that also does a similar job. Next slide. Oh, by the way, I just want to say if there's any questions.
Is there a way you can tell between Google crawling the HTML and then rendering it?
No, you can't. So I asked this. So basically, you cannot see in the logs if Google's crawling by HTML or JavaScript. Basically, the process is Google will download the HTML source. It'll use the cache data from your previous pages to not overload your server, and then it'll internally render that. So what happens is first it'll index the page in HTML. Then what it'll do is it'll go through its JavaScript rendering engine. It won't render the JavaScript page in real time. It'll simulate it based on what it believes. So it's not going to be sitting there for 10 seconds. It's going to do it in 0.1 seconds, but simulate what it would be like in the 10 seconds. And then it render and index it. But it doesn't actually go back and view it. It actually does it on its own server and uses its cache resources.
Yeah.
So there's no way you'll be able to tell from the logs if it's been done. I guess the only way you could tell, theoretically, if you wanted to do a test, it's not going to be super accurate, but I would think it's the best, is have something in your footer that is only accessible by JavaScript, and then do a site search of that domain and all the pages. You get a number. And then if you do a site and have a look at what JavaScript element, so if you've got copyright 2022 as the JavaScript element that's injected via client-side JS, that then needs a JavaScript render. You can then get a rough estimate. Okay, if I've got 100,000 pages and only 1,000 pages are showing up with the crawl copyright 2022, that only 1% of your pages are getting indexed or rendered by JavaScript. Any other questions? Next slide. So the intent behind my programmatic programmatic SEO? I guess really fundamentally, it comes back to the keyword research, right? And identifying keyword modifiers that are number one, going to be effective, and number two, have search volume, and number three, are going to serve the business intent for the product or service you're offering. Generally speaking, it does normally go core product service offering plus keyword modifier. An example of that would be plumbers, location, right? Surrey Hills, Piedmont, Sydney, Kensington, Engadine, whatever it might be. The modifier would be the location. And this can be interchangeable, right? This stays the same, and the modifier is the thing that changes. So how this would work is like take, for example, you have a page about plumbers and you have a set piece of content. You then have also a set piece of content about each location. That's how you then combine those two data points to create a unique page for that specific query. And then you could do that for multiple different categories as well. Another example in the e-commerce space would be like small would be a modifier, because you'd have small, large, medium, extra small, etc. You'd have t-shirt as like the main keyword, and then you have red as the colors, another modifier. So you've got red, blue, green, orange, indigo, whatever it might be. Another one from I guess the recruitment kind of space would be resume template plus industry. So you've got the resume template that kind of stays the same, but then you've got the industry that changes, and there's thousands and thousands of different occupations. So having data sets of those two kind of points, where you've got the resume template and you've got the location, so not the location, the industry data, you can combine them to create pages at scale, just by combining the two to create a unique URL, which then could get indexed. Yeah, is there any questions about that? Because I feel like this is probably very, very, very important part of programmatic SEO to get right. Doing the initial keyword research to work out what the market is looking for, what type of pages can be built, and then finding the data set that matches this type of keywords in order to kind of like make it happen.
Would you say that GitHub is probably the best place to find?
One of. There's many different places to find like, CSV data sets. It's one of. Okay.
Slide.
Yep, next slide. So common mistakes, right? So I've discussed like, how it kind of needs to be done and what should be done, and what, I guess, the benefits, and I guess what you need to do in terms of keyword research. But talking about what could go wrong is pretty much one of the most important things here, as this differentiates, I guess, a normal type of SEO project to the everyday type of SEO project. We've got blog posts and landing pages, etc. So ensuring that there's enough data on the pages is a big thing, right? You've probably heard of thin content before. Thin content is something you want to avoid. And generally speaking, you can work out your thin content ratio. I guess one quick way is going into the site column if you don't have GSC access. Site column search, that's how many pages, and then versus how many pages are on the site. If you have GSC access, you could actually go into the coverage tab and you actually see, okay, there's this many pages indexed and versus this many pages on the site. Okay, the ratio is 30 or 40% of all pages are indexed. So, but what you can also do is you can go into the crawled but not indexed tab to work out, okay, how many pages are we actually ignoring, rather than the ones that they're not actually seeing at all. You want to work out how much are they ignoring, what percentage are they ignoring, why are they ignoring those pages and indexing the others, right? Do a bit of analysis to work out what's going on there. You don't want to be creating pages with client-side JavaScript. I mentioned this before. It just makes it so much harder for the pages to get rendered. When they view it in HTML, they're not going to see any of your data points, meaning they're unlikely to execute it, meaning they're likely to not index it and classify it as too thin, and also likely that the crawl bot is just going to stop crawling the site altogether right there. And then they're pretty much going to put a cap on your site and not, like, I guess, reward it in the same way that they would if it was based on HTML. Not having enough domain authority is another one. Again, when we're talking about pages of the millions and millions of sites of the millions and millions of pages, we've got to make sure that there's enough websites that are pointing to this site that the crawl bot is actually going to go and funnel through, right? And this is critical. Like these bigger sites, the reason that they actually do perform well is because you're giving enough resources to give enough kind of like report to say, look, go through this whole site and index it all. That's the main reason you would want domain authority for these types of sites. Next slide. So also, like, you still crazy thing, you still want to submit all your pages on the sitemap. Even if you have 50 million pages, it sounds so basic, but I've spoken to a lot of people that are not doing it. So you definitely still want to do that, right? Sometimes it is good to go back to basics. A lot of people sometimes set the internal linking to random as opposed to like properly structuring it. You don't want to just set, this category, just randomly link to this category. It should not be done like that. It's got to be so every single page links to every single other page, and there's no orphan pages at all. Like you want that is something you want to avoid. So that is definitely worth spending time on. Can be very complex to set up, I must say. It's probably best done with a search engineer, but it is definitely worth it. Like not having mixed content. So I've seen pages not do well where they just have text on the page. It's not really going to perform as well as, having maybe a relevant video or maybe a relevant image that's also kind of related to the page you're trying to rank for. And pagination issues is a huge one. So for example, like what I personally do is there's two things I would do with pagination at this scale. Sometimes you're going to have pages that, go into, 2, 3, 4. In the two things, I normally canonicalize it back to the main page for 2, 3, 4 onwards, or I just no index the page outright, because it's not going to rank for the keyword that you want. You want your original page ranking, and you just want to make sure that those pages aren't going to blow up your kind of like crawl budget, because they're going to probably be seen as duplicate from the previous page. Next slide. So this is my favorite part, like what can be done at scale, right? What can you actually do? How can you beef these pages up? That's what really matters, right? That's what's going to get you the results. So you can add multiple different data points, whether it be like UGC, whether it be, stock images that are relevant to the content, anything, right? You want to add more and more data points and data sets to your existing data in order to really kind of like beef it up. You want to remove index pages that haven't had many impressions. I've said here 6 months, can be also 12 months. You pretty much want to trim the fat, essentially get rid of anything that's sort of not benefiting your SEO campaign, anything that's sort of not going to be bringing in your results, and anything that's not bringing in traffic. You don't need it, so get rid of it. So you also want to remove like non-critical pages, which are crawled, discovered, but not indexed. So this one's, okay, there is a right way to do this. We know that in the coverage tab, you've got the limit of 1,000 kind of pages. So the only real way to do this, I know it's annoying until Google bring out their search coverage API, is pretty much create like subfolders of every single section in Search Console and export it. At the end of the day, that's the only way to do it right now. But generally speaking, when you have a look at the first 1,000, you get a good vibe about which pages they're actually indexing and which ones they're not. There tends to be patterns. And if you can identify the pattern to something, it's generally pretty safe to assume that, and especially if you take that pattern and go through different kind of instances and different variations of it, and it's still consistent, it's pretty safe to assume that that's the issue and then kind of get those removed as well. So that's another method. What I've been playing around personally lately is adding entities of related keywords. So taking a keyword, getting a data set of entities, and then injecting those keywords into like these programmatic pages. Obviously, there is a method into getting it human readable. But that also works. It's quite a new thing as well with NLP. Next slide. So you can also inject content via AI programmatically. So using your seed keyword, what you can do is, there's many tools on the market, but there's quite a few that are actually offering their API now, which you can create sentences and keywords, and you can inject these straight into the databases for millions of pages at one time. That's a good option if, the AI content is like meeting your, I guess, compliance. Bigger sites sometimes can get into an issue with that, but it's a very good option if you're a startup. So if you want to add context to your images, the alt tags can generally be difficult to do at scale, but there is a few Python libraries I've personally been testing that inject the alt text into the image, so that way you don't need to go in and kind of like edit the images, and it can all be done kind of at scale using AI. And this one's so overlooked, it's crazy. So ensuring the mega menu structures funnel the authority correctly, right? So you'll see many sites that have kind of like menu structures, but they're only like 2 or 3 different type of sections or pages. This is the menu structure. It's going to be on every page. Putting in 50+ links is fine. Google's have come out and said they're fine for you to put 1,000, 2,000 links on a page, right? So use that to your advantage. Beef up the pages that you want beefed up in your menu structure. It's one of the most powerful places to do it. That's going to be like consistent throughout the whole site, and reap the benefits of the domain authority. And I think that's all I've got. Yeah, so that's me. I'm Dejan Mladenovski. I'm the Programmatic SEO of Australia, and I like to take any questions.
Got a new title.
That's it.
Let's go.
Has to be done. Has to be done.
Can you give us some good examples of ways that you would differentiate similar pages within the programmatic setting?
So how would I differentiate different pages? It'd be based on the data set. So obviously the main differentiation would be making sure the text is not the same.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's this whole argument about duplicate content. Duplicate content is fine, so long as it's internal duplicate content. External duplicate content is a different debate than internal duplicate content. I can show you hundreds of examples of internal duplicate content having no problems.
Right.
So, any other questions?
So what happened to your opening hours website?
So it actually is going well. Like it's if you look at it in Ahrefs, it's a hockey stick. But what happened was we got the data points, we got it sorted. And basically what happened is Google came in and they put in a new search feature.
Yeah.
So before you type, like, let's just say,
Open.
prosperity media opening hours,
Yeah.
right? And there'd be only links and there might be a GMB of the business. What they actually came out and did is they actually put in prosperity media open today, 7 p.m. or 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. right there. So that completely destroys your click-through rate of any sort of like results moving downward. So it's unfortunate, but that's the game you're in.
What do you think about those sites that are like not like mobile number sites where you go and search the number and then they have like every number indexed?
Yeah, I've seen that.
It's a traffic play.
Traffic play. I mean, I've looked into it, right? I think it's got potential if done correctly, for sure. The only thing is just to get those pages indexed, like what kind of data points are you going to have that's unique? I mean, some of the bigger sites
Like
that have been around the
user-generated
world,
content.
well, they've got user-generated content. The spam, like, 66 complaints from, X0804, whatever.
Yeah.
That's how they're sort of beefing it up. I mean, that's how they've done it because they've been around a while. They can sort of do it if you're coming into that space, or you need to get innovative, you need to get creative. I'm not saying you can't be done, but you probably need to find a data set that's going to be sort of relevant to it.
Any other resources that come to mind that you could point to for getting to programmatic SEO?
Resources, there's no real, I'd say the only real way to do it is doing it, right? Just actually get a data set, get a site, create thousands of pages at scale, see what works. There's no other way to learn SEO. I mean, you can watch a presentation like this all day and, you can read every blog article on the web. There's a few articles I can point you to, but it's not going to be the same as actually testing and doing it and seeing what works. But yeah, I think like with small scale programmatic sites, I think like when you get up to about the 20,000 page mark, I think you can get away with a minimal domain authority. But once you start talking about massive amounts of pages, it is going to be important that you have links supporting that content. Definitely.
What's the cutoff for the links? Would you say, is it like DR40 plus or DR30?
I'm an SEO and my answer is always going to be it depends, right? Completely depends on the niche, completely depends on the market you're entering. If I was to enter the directory market in Colombia, it's going to be very, very different than if I was entering the travel space in Australia. The travel space in Australia, I'd say the cutoff is probably a DR70. But if I was entering the if I was entering the travel space in Colombia, I'd say I could probably get away with a DR30, right? Like it really depends on the market you're entering. It depends on the niche you're building the site in.
Yeah, it reminds me of like Longtail UX, how they could never take on new sites,
Can never do it.
fresh domains.
Can't do it because
domains with authority.
Well, come to think of it, if I showed you the keyword modifier with the t-shirt, that is essentially a long tail UX play when they're doing e-commerce, right? So that's essentially what they're doing. Long tail UX are exactly doing programmatic pages using the data, existing data of websites, inventories, or like product pages, and just spinning up new pages based upon a few modifiers and a few kind of like segmentations and filters. That's all they're doing. It does work. I mean, there's this argument about doorway pages. I think you might hear a word about doorway pages and being frowned upon, but I mean, if the page is providing UX, I mean, Google's got to show something. Like if you're searching for a small green t-shirt, what's Google going to show? Like the user's going to want to see a set of data showing small green t-shirts. So it kind of makes sense that that's what they're going to show. And I think it'll be around for a while. Any other questions? Come on, fire it out.
You talk more about how you're injecting content using NLP.
What part do you want to know? So that's sort of a complex process. So it involves APIs. So personally, I'm using the GPT-J engine. So it's similar to GPT-3, but it's open source. And then that has its own kind of like, I guess, model for data and generating text. So it's like text generation at scale. So it's you give it a keyword and then it kind of like creates a sentence based on your parameters and based on your configuration. So what you actually have to do is you have to, it's an AI, and then you have to sort of like fine tune it. You have to fine tune it to your specific site, your specific tone of voice, your specific everything. And then what you can do is you can essentially give it a seed set of keywords in cell A, and then it will pump out 200 words in cell B related to that cell A based on the parameters and fine tuning you've done. And then you can take that CSV and then inject it into your database to display it on your website for that specific page.
Right. You're not putting it into like existing content.
Well, you technically are, right? You're putting it onto existing pages. Yes.
Not like
You could do that. So you could, like, say you probably use Jasper, Java's conversion, or whatever name they're going by. You take a sentence, you press generate, it's going to extend whatever you're talking about. There's that option too.
Yeah.
There's text extension, sure. I just prefer this method just because it's easier to do on scale.
Can you run through the process of actually getting programmatic